We've got to get your medical takes. Thankfully, there wasn't too much that went on in the game from a medical standpoint. It felt like every week we love bringing you on, so we brought you on to analyze the injuries, but we almost had too many to talk about every week. I'm happy that we don't have as many this week, but I did want to start with the defensive line, because I feel like that's where not only is that kind of the focal point because of kind of the juxtaposition between the Lions and the Packers and what they did to improve their defensive line, and the public view that the Lions didn't improve their defensive line enough. But you also have Hutchinson's return from injury. You've got the Hassanin thing that I want to talk to you about, and in his possible return, and then the timelines on McNeil and Pascal. So I'm curious about kind of all of your viewpoints on that.
Yeah, the defensive line, very disappointing against the Packers. Their defensive line dominated our O-line. Our defensive line, we returned a bunch of healthy players from last year, but it didn't look any better than last year as far as the pass rush. So that's a major, major concern going forward. However, optimistically, if you want to look at it, with Hutchinson, you figure he's probably going to have a little bit of a mental hurdle early on in the season. That fracture, certainly traumatic for him. It might take him a couple games to really get back into the swing of things. Hopefully Hutchinson improves his pass rush over the next couple weeks. Derek Barnes, who came back from MCL, PCL, was hoping he'd be a bigger part of the pass rush, but he didn't really show up in that regard either. Tyleik Williams, one of our big additions, first-round pick, he really didn't do much as far as invading the pocket and pressuring Jordan Love either. So all in all, somewhat of a disappointing day for the D-line.
So you mentioned mentally, and I think that's something that goes hand in hand with injury recovery, is that you also have to be mentally recovered from your injury to still perform well and not get injured again. Do you feel like the Lions have been good about being able to assess when a player is ready to come back, not just physically, but also mentally?
I think generally, but with the mental phase of things, it's unpredictable. We really can't investigate into the brain. We don't know much about the brain in general. That's why concussion research, concussion knowledge is so very limited. With the mental status of guys, with their psychology, you really can't know. So you just got to throw them out there and hope for the best. I think the Lions in general do a pretty good job gradually ramping guys up. But when it comes to the mental phase of things, there's really nothing you can do.
That's interesting. Yeah, I know we've talked a lot about the physical and mental connection. The Lions do really preach the culture end of it, so I feel like that's a part that they're very focused on. And you've covered Laporta, and obviously we've talked about Ragnow a lot, fighting through the injuries, and that's got to wear on him mentally. I think that probably happened with Ragnow to a degree and led to the early retirement a little bit. But I want to toggle back to the defensive line for a minute, because we were talking about Hutchinson. Did you see any differences? I know you were talking about maybe that leg whip and some differences in his approach. Did you see any adjustments there from kind of your view of it?
We didn't really get to see that, because at no point did he actually get to the quarterback to bring Jordan Love down. Part of that might be because he might have been a little tentative, might have had a little mental hurdle there. So really can't assess at this point whether he has changed his technique or if there is a little bit of timidness on his part.
Yeah, he had to take advantage of hitting him when he shouldn't have. That was the only contact that he had with him for most of the game there. I'm curious what your stance is on Hassanin. This is the first time that we've seen this with kind of the rule on kind of, I guess maybe for lack of a better word, stashing people and doing the injury buyout piece. What's your take on Hassanin's injury and his, I guess, ability and prospect of returning to the Lions later in the season?
Well, the good news is it's not a full pec rupture. Otherwise, he would have been definitively out for the year. they would have put him on IR right away. So it's not a complete pec rupture. What it likely is a pec strain, which can be back as soon as 3 weeks. We saw Ragnar come back from his strain in about 3 weeks. So typically a pec strain, you can be back within a few weeks, maybe a couple months towards the longer end, but he should be back. As you mentioned, it's sort of interesting how they handled him at the cut-down date. They could have put him on IR and kept control over him, but they instead decided to release him, waive him with an injury designation, which exposed him to other teams. Fortunately, it looks like he's going to come back to the team, but really, it's sort of uncertain. He's a free agent basically right now. He needs to wait till 3 weeks after the injury settlement date, which is unknown at this point. So we don't know exactly when he's going to get back. I'm expecting hopefully around October, maybe November.
I have to think that Holmes had some reason to believe that he would return when he did that, because he's always kind of playing usually even 3D chess rather than checkers, with especially how he manipulates the roster and cutting down to 50 this year and using the practice squad like he does. So I have to imagine there was a conversation that was had there, but it'll be interesting. Like you said, Doc, he will have to wait longer if he does return to the Lions, which is why they have that rule in place. But we got to take a quick break, and we're going to come back with the Doc. We're going to look for his balloon in the break, but stick with us. You're listening to Sports Intel on Jethro FM. Elaine and I are coming back here with the Doc, giving us good info as always, good intel on the Lions. Doc, we didn't talk a ton after camp, so I'm curious. Obviously we just had one game, and Elaine and I were talking about this in the show open, but it's always funny to me. This can't be your mindset with it, so you're a good one to talk to about this. But I introduced today as Overreaction Monday, because on some of the other sports radio shows in the area or in Detroit, they've already been talking about firing Holmes and Campbell, and we all know that that's kind of on the ridiculous side of sports takes. But I'm curious what you kind of got out of that first game and what the outlook is on the season for you, because we do know this is going to be a tough division. We do know that the schedule is very difficult for the division as a whole, and especially for the Lions being the number one team, playing a lot of number one. So I'm curious how, in your kind of analytic way, how you're taking this, because I know you're not trying to fire anybody, but I'm curious what you're thinking for the season here.
Well, I was definitely disappointed, especially with how the offense performed. The offense was returning most of the players, all the skilled players, and it was a little disappointed to see them not really be able to move the ball. Well, they moved the ball a little bit, but really did not do as well as they should have. A lot of dink and dunks. The running game was not good. One of the main concerns coming into the season was the interior O-line, and that looked very shaky to start. However, first week of the season, as you said, it's Overreaction Monday, and week one is the prime example of that. None of these guys play in the preseason except for the rookies as far as the starters. So you got a bunch of guys who have not played together in a real game. It's going to look ugly, very likely, for the first 2-3 weeks of the season. We saw it look ugly last year in the first 3 weeks of the season for the offense. So I'm not overreacting at this point. We need to really give it 3 or 4 weeks to see how things go.
Which that's ostensibly what Campbell said in one of the pressers as well. And that's what I tried to remind people earlier in the show, that they didn't look so good against the Rams and the Bucs last year either. And that wasn't necessarily because the coordinators were new, because they weren't, but it was the same kind of thing. The approach in the preseason is an interesting one. We talked about that a little bit last preseason, the whole idea of the rest versus rust and getting people into the games, with Campbell being one of the coaches that adopts the, hey, I'm going to protect injuries, I'm not going to play the guys. It's inevitable that they're going to have a little bit a slower start into the season, I feel like. And I don't know, we don't have enough data yet, but I'd be curious to look at this with over time if that does actually have, I'm curious about your take on this, if it does have an impact on the injury side of things, because it's like, yeah, you're protecting them from some impact, but you're also not really ingratiating them in and warming them up the same way. So does it save injuries? Does it lead to some stiffness possibly later in the season? I know there's no way to definitively know that, but that's an interesting discussion to me.
Yeah, that's an interesting theory. Unfortunately, like you said, it's impossible to do an actual good, legitimate, reliable study on that kind of thing. In my opinion, I like the way the Lions handle things. Not exposing guys to any kind of injury in preseason, I think, is smart. Too many football injuries are just fluky things, random things that happen. The less exposure they have to something like that, the better. And the Lions are not a team that's just barely trying to squeak into the playoffs. They're not a team that has to get off to a super fast start. It's okay for them to ease into the season. They're good enough where as long as they play as well as they should be able to play, they should be well into the playoff hunt. They won 15 games last year with a slow start. So it's way too early. I think the way they handle preseason is the right way to go.
Yeah, it would be impossible to have that study, but I wanted to gauge your answer on that. I also have a local doctor, a friend of mine here, that is going to be in to co-host the show at some point, and I want to make sure to hook you guys up because he's kind of studying the connection between stomach issues and tightness in joints. So I think that would be an interesting discussion for you two to have, not so much me because I can't add much. I'll introduce you, talk about food, and then let you guys run with that on one of your next appearances here. But I am curious about one, if you have any take on that, but I also want to ask you about Arnold and if you saw anything there. I know he ended up going out. He's not too concerned, but I'm curious about what you saw in game there.
Yeah, it looks like good news. In game, I didn't see anything. I reviewed all his plays. He played the first half. Did not see any kind of him pulling up. Did not see anything notable. His final play of the game that he played was the very end of the second quarter. He was during punt return coverage. He looked great, sprinted down, moving around just fine. And after the game, it sounds like nothing serious is going on, which confirms what we saw in video.
Yeah, I think that it was that longer route that they said they got the injury on, but I was curious if you caught that. But Elaine's got a question for you here too.
So, sorry, it's not an injury style question, but I did want to pick the brains of a Lions fan about this for next week. What do you think next week's going to kind of look like play wise between Ben Johnson and Dan Campbell? Like I feel like maybe Ben might have other things up his sleeves, but all we've really seen from him is a lot of similar plays. A lot.
Yeah, hi Elaine, how's it going?
Good, how are you?
Good, yeah, it's going to be exciting. I'm sure Ben Johnson is going to want to show himself off next week. I mean, we're going to see what he's going to happen tonight, him playing the Vikings tonight, so that's going to be exciting to watch. But yeah, absolutely, I think the Lions need to be on guard for trick plays, misdirections, all that kind of stuff, because I'm sure he wants to show the Lions and all the Lions fans, everybody, that he's got it, and the Lions are going to miss him.
I'm wondering if he's going to get a little too cute with things, especially next week, because that was one of the things that we talked about the slow start last year. That was one of the things that I saw as one of the issues with the offense when they were sputtering a little bit at the beginning of the season, because he's clearly, I'm not going to now take the stance that, oh, well, he wasn't good when he was here or anything. He's clearly a smart guy. He's a great play caller. But when he when he did have some problems with his offense, it kind of felt like he was getting in his own way. It was like he was thinking 3 or 4 steps ahead instead of applying Occam's razor and saying, hey, the run game's working, let's just keep pounding the football. And then he'd go, well, the run game I'm not sure about. Let's let J-Mo throw one now. And he'd do that and zig where I think he was trying to outthink the defensive coordinator, but it was almost like he'd outthink what he thought the defensive coordinator was going to do, and then basically go back in a circle and then be right back at the beginning where he started, and then not necessarily counter what the defensive coordinator was actually doing.
There might be some truth to that, but it's too easy to second guess things once you know the results. For example, the JMO thing in the playoffs. First of all, we were way behind, and the defense could not stop them at all. So we needed as quick of a score as possible. I have zero issue with him trying a trick play to get a big, quick score. Most of our trick plays last year worked. Most of this creative stuff worked 90% of the time, really an incredibly high percentage of the time. So just cherry picking the certain things that didn't work, especially in retrospect, I really don't think it's fair to Ben Johnson. Nothing's going to work 100% in the NFL. The other team has great defenders out there, 11 players, so there's just no way to make it work all the time. If you can have things work 60, 70% of the time, I think that's already a great percentage. Well,
and maybe the JMO one's a bad example. I agree with you on the trick plays in general, but I think he would go away from the run game and then go to the pass game, countering them doubling up on the run game that wasn't really happening yet. And I think that was more the approach. So I'm curious if he's going to do too much of that in week 2, where he knows a lot about how Dan Campbell thinks and how Kelvin Shepard thinks and how those guys think. So I'm curious. I know he's confident he's going to be able to outthink them, but that's the part that I'm curious about, is if he's going to outthink them or outthink himself.
Well, that is an interesting thought. Is he trying to outplay himself? It reminds me of that scene in The Princess Bride, where they're trying to figure out who has the poison, and is he pretending like he doesn't have the poison? Do I think he's pretending? All that kind of stuff. So I like what you're saying there, which is you can potentially outthink yourself, and since he knows the Lions so well, maybe he will outthink himself in this upcoming game.
That's just one place where my mind goes with it. This is not a burial of Johnson. I think there's a good chance that he could develop a very good scheme that works well on the Lions as well, because he does know the personnel so well. But that is something that I saw as a trait that people were blaming some of those other things that you're talking about. But in actuality, it was maybe him just getting a little too high level with it and not just going with, because I think it was the Rams game last year where he was struggling with that a little bit. They had some issues with the cleats or the field that we talked about, and people were slipping, so that was disrupting the offense. That's not on Johnson at all. And then it was like once they got into overtime, they just started pounding the ball up the middle with Montgomery, and it was like, okay, where was this the rest of the game? And I know that that's not the most fun to call sometimes, but that was clearly the best strategy. And to credit Johnson, he got onto that strategy and it worked. So it will be fun to watch that and see how that works, because this could be a fun rivalry between Johnson and Campbell for years to come here.
Yeah, absolutely. With the run game, sometimes you just need to pound the run. Didn't work well against the Packers yesterday. Once they went to the pass a little bit more, it seemed like that worked better. But sometimes, you need to get down to basics and just pound the run better.
And I think Morton will be better at that, but maybe not have as much of the flourishes that Johnson does. So it'll be a different approach. But Doc, we really appreciate you joining us and talking some food and some Lions. We'll have you back on when it makes sense. But tell the people where they can follow you here.
Yeah, find me on X at Jimmy Liao, MD, last name Liao.
definitely give him a follow. He does some great stuff. We talked about the food, and I know some people probably give that a snicker, but he does great coverage on Lions Wire with the food in different cities and in different stadiums, and also covers the medical stuff and other things very well. So thanks, Doc. We appreciate it, and we'll have you back on soon.
All right. Thanks, Ryan.
Sports Intel with Ryan Walsh is brought to you by Mary Freebed, Collectible Insurance Services, West Michigan Eye Care Associates, Eric Hall, DDS, Calder Financial Group, Grand Management, Rydan Investments, JH Realty Partners, and Encore Business Group. Sports Intel with Ryan Walsh airs live Monday nights, 7 p.m. Eastern on Jethro FM.
Stay informed and stay vigilant.